Yes, thank you, Jesus, for another beautiful day, yet again with another beautiful tutorial. So, this is part two of Keycloak introduction. We looked at part one, and we basically ran through quickly the different facets of Keycloak. We looked at the RAM, how to create a RAM, and we looked at the client, how to create clients. Remember, clients are created under RAMs. You can refer to that tutorial for more detail. But today, we are looking a little bit in depth under client, and specifically under the tab called authorization, because this is where most of the work actually gets to happen. So where we'll start off where we left off in the previous tutorial. So like we said, we have about 7 tabs under the authorization tab under clients. So let's jump to, we'll come back to the settings tab. Let's look at the resources first. So now if you want to if you want to secure your application, the number of things you're looking at. So let's say your application has services in it, so you're serving your services via, for example, a URL. It's a web API, service. So you're serving your services via a URL. So those are the URLs that you're going to be protecting. Whoever gains access to that URL is able to gain access to your application, but you need to know who is it that is trying to gain access to my service via this URL. In Keycloak, those are called resources, or sometimes we also add in the word scope, but basically these are objects that you're trying to secure. So um, you would start with building the resources that you want to secure, but for the flow, to give a better flow of this tutorial, we won't build the resources first. We will build, because it's dependent on other things, just like you see under here. So we will build, we'll start off with other things that are more atomic, that don't have dependencies on them, and I think that's you know the scope. So a little bit about the scopes. A scope is the extent to which you can interact with a given resource. Like, for example, if you have a banking resource, or a banking account resource, you know uh, that resource, the bank account, can have several actions that can be taken on net. For example, you can view that bank account, you can update maybe some details on that bank account. You can probably delete if that's possible. So those are scopes on that resource, things that you can do. And by you, I mean the different roles within the organization. It could be a client, it could be a manager of the bank, it could be a teller. Like, for example, a teller deducts if you go withdraw some money from the bank account, bank from the bank counter. You're interacting with the teller who sends requests to deduct um, money or funds off your account, so that you check out whatever it is, whether it's a check that you're trying to check out or you're trying to withdraw money from the counter. So the scopes, these are the different scopes. We would have some scopes that are already built, but a scope is very easy to create. The very basic scopes are create, delete, view, update. These are very basic things, very, very basic, common almost across all resources. But then you find other scopes like approve. Maybe that resource needs approving. For example, if it's a payment and it has to be approved before it actually gets into the paid status, so that's an action that you can add as a status. Or review, if it's an application that has been sent, it an application, which is application resource. So if an application has been submitted and we need to approve that application before it gets into the next level or to the next status, so that would be a scope under application resource. So scopes are under resources. A bank account resource can have scopes like create bank account, delete bank account, view bank account, update bank account, or approve, or whatever it is. So creating a scope is very easy. Just click on create, and then for example, if we have a reject scope, and give it a display name, save, and you're done. Pretty much it on scopes. So now, after scopes, let's jump to where should we go? Let me see. Can we get to permissions? No, let's not go to permissions. Let's go to resources. Let's go back to resources. So now, remember I told you a resource is where your service is, which can be under URL or anything else. But let's look at this resource that has been created. So under resource, you have a name, like this is my marine insurance resource. You have a display name, the owner. This is automatically assigned. Then the type, I'm using this convention, but you don't have to use that convention. You can use any other convention, something that is unique that can be used across. But now here, if you look at URI, since my resource is accessible via URL or URI, I have input. Let me change this to API. This is my URI. It's the base URL is already there. You remember we set it up in the first part of the tutorial, the root of the application. So this is appended to the root to give the entire absolute URL. Now on a marine insurance certificate has a couple of things that can be done to it, and these we call them scopes. So if you look at scopes under here, we have added the scopes. Let me delete one so that I show you. Now that I create, I can add the scope create. I've already added view, approve, update, delete. So I can view a marine insurance, I can approve it, I can update it, I can delete it, or I can create it. So that's why I've added all the different scopes that I'm able to do, the different scopes that are applicable to this resource. They could be whatever number. But for organization, you could break this up. Maybe you could create a resource just for creation, like a marine insurance certificate create resource, and then you just give it the scope create another one, marine insurance certificate view resource, and then just give it the scope view. But that's a little bit tedious, so I preferred to put all this together under one roof, and then add the star to my URI, so that whatever comes after here doesn't really matter. I could when I'm calling this resource, I could probably decide to call to identify the different scopes using using the last part of the URL, that whatever text is there as the identity to what scope I'm calling. Maybe if I added on create, that means I'm calling the create resource, the create scope of the resource. View, I'm calling the view scope of the resource, and so on and so forth. Since I have very many scopes here, I just put a star, an asterisk, that word. Anyhow, let's continue. So we've already created this resource with all its scopes, and thus you're done with creation of your resource. Now, to take things a bit deeper, remember we created the scope. These are the different scopes. Now we've added our scopes to the resource. The different scopes are here added to this resource, the marine insurance policy certificate resource. Now we have things we call policies. Now what you need to know about a policy in the Keycloak context, a policy is basically a set of rules or conditions that are applied that are applied to a certain permission. For example, if you want to give, we'll look at permissions a bit later, but right now let's first deal with policies. So for example, if you want to give a permission, a view permission to a user, and you're telling us that this user should be able to, excuse me, my phone was ringing. Yeah, we want this user to be able to view the marine insurance certificate. So you have to give a certain set of conditions that have to be met before whoever you're granting this access is able, to view or to enjoy that permission. So this is why you create all those permissions. We have a number of permissions. If you click on the right there, you have a drop down with the number of permissions. We have the role-based permission. Now, role-based permission is where you've created a number of roles and you're like, whoever has this role and that role is under this policy, grant them access. And we'll look at those a little later. Or a client-based, permission policy, or a time-based. Client still is the same. Remember clients? I told you about clients. Clients are not users. Clients are clients. Refer to my previous tutorial to know what clients are in the Keycloak context. Then we have the time-based. The time-based policies. Here you're granting access to a resource based on a given time. For example, you might want to grant access to a resource not before a certain date and time. You can input that here, or not, or no after. You can do that here. Or if you want to be more specific with day, month, year, hour, minute, all that you can do here. So access to a given resource would be within the stipulated time frame or the given time that you have tied it or bound it to. So that's what you would use that time resource for. Or if you want to set specific users, you're like, for me to give this permission, for example, a view permission to my bank account, only this user can be able to view. So you can add that policy to that permission, and that's exactly what will happen. Or aggregated, if you have a number of policies, you want to add multiple policies on one inside, all embedded under one policy, you can use aggregated policies. And lastly, a group. If you have, for example, an IT group with so many users and you want to grant permission to that group, you can use a group policy. So I think I've said a lot about policies. So let's look at creation of an example of a policy. So we are creating a policy for marine insurance. Yeah, so remember, for the other resource that we created in the beginning. So I'm saying, giving it a name, description, I'm saying I have a role, I have a resource called marine insurance. Remember this, let me show it to you. Remember this, this resource. So I'm coming here in policies and I'm saying I want to create a policy for that resource. Now, since that resource is basically, I want users to be able to, I want a set of users, and in this case it's an API user. I want them to be able to create, update, view, those three. I'll give a role to whichever user that I want to give access to. So for example, I have a role called UESW. It's a role. I'll create a user later and I'll give them this role. But now I've given this role to this policy here. I've given this role, I've allowed this role into this policy, so that if I grant this policy to a given permission, then whichever user has this role, they'll be able to enjoy the permissions or permissions where I've added, where I've associated this marine insurance policy. Got it? So since we have an admin, of course, an admin should be able to do most of the things that everyone else can do. So that's why I added an admin role here. So here I've added two roles. Whoever has an admin role and whoever has this API role, they'll be able to do certain permissions, and we'll look at those permissions. So I think straight away, let's run to the permissions. So now I've created a number of permissions here. I have a create, delete, update, view permission. I tried to make them atomic. I do want to aggregate them. I'll show you another example where you could aggregate permissions. Like for example, you can have create, view, update under one set of permissions, and you can just grant that at once. But I just wanted to have one permission, one scope, or one permission. Should be one permission, not one permission having a set of permissions in there. So we created a permission, and remember, you can create a resource based permission where you grant access to the entire resource, permission for the entire resource, or a scope based permission where you're granting permissions to scopes under that resource. Remember, we had scopes like view, create, delete, update. So here we are creating scope based permissions. We are giving permissions to scopes under the given resource. So that's why you have create, delete, update, view. You could have reject here, you could have approve, and so many others, as long as they exist under this resource. Okay, under this resource, these ones here. So let's look at these permissions. Let's look at the creation of one of the permissions. So you give it a name, give it a description, you specify which resource you're trying to protect, giving permissions to. So in this case, it's the marine insurance resource that I showed you earlier, and then which scope this permission is for. This scope is just for create only, not view, not update, just create. I could add others if I wanted, but no, this is atomic. It's just for create. Then after you've added your scope, you add the policy. Now remember, I told you, you give a permission, you define a permission. I'm defining a view permission. What does a view permission do? A view permission enables a user, whoever has who has been granted that permission, to view my resource. But what are the conditions for this view permission to be granted? That's why you have to apply a policy. This is where you stipulate what exactly are the conditions that should be met in order for this permission to be granted to whoever you're granting it, or whichever time you're granting it. Remember, policy can be roles are given to users, or it can be time. You can only access this resource within this given time frame, or whoever is in this group, if it's a group resource, will be able to be granted this permission. So I applied this marine insurance policy, which is this policy that we created earlier, to this permission. Okay, got it? Very simple. Let's continue. So let's look at another example. Let's look at view, then we'll look at delete, because there's a difference here with delete. Create, delete. You see, delete has something different, so we'll look at it. View. Now here I'm saying whoever has a view permission, their scope of interaction with the resource is view only. And then the policy that applies the conditions that must be met are this, which I've added already down there. So let's look at delete. Now the delete is a bit different. I didn't want to give delete whoever has, everybody that has, the policy of, remember there were two policies. I created one other separate policy which I called admin only. Under this admin only, I want those that have the role admin to be able, only those with the role admin are the ones under this policy. So whoever doesn't have this role can never be able to access this permission delete, because remember, it has the policy. This is the condition that has to be true in order for this permission to be granted. Okay, so yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So this delete, only admins can delete. That's basically what it means. and you're done with your policies. So we've looked at resources, we've looked at scopes, we've looked at policies, we've looked at permissions. Settings, basically you can export, you can export all these settings that we've been creating here, and then if you have a new client, you can just come and import them, and you don't have to go through all these, typing all this stuff. You can just import them and just do a few edits there. It basically just gets you up and running very, very, very fast. Now let's look at the evaluate. This evaluate, you evaluate, it's a very important tool. It helps you evaluate the different policies, permissions, resources, everything that we've been doing. This evaluate helps us evaluate how they're working. Let me run through very fast. For example, I'll choose the client we're working with this, and then I already have a user there who is the USW. Remember this user, I didn't talk about roles. Let me show you quickly roles so that you see what roles this user has. So users in role, this role UESW API has this user. Okay, so there's another role, this admin. So this admin doesn't have the other user. So basically the user that we are talking about, this user should only be able to do everything else except delete, according to the settings that we did. So let's go and try that out very fast. Now authorization, let's evaluate. So we're selecting the client, we're selecting the user, this is the user. So let's give this role, I can apply the second role if I want them to be an admin, though they don't have it in the settings over there, but here it's just evaluate. You give and take away certain roles to see how it all behaves. But now just leave this because we already have, this is what we have to look at now. So which resource are we looking at? We are looking at the marine insurance resource. What do we want to see? We want to see if this guy can view. So we add view and then we evaluate. Can this person be able to be, yeah, this person can view because the result is permit. Okay, so that means this person can be able to view our resource. You see here there's a delete here, but let's not talk about it here. Let's just come here, back here. Let's go back to the same resource. What other scope is there? Delete. Can this person be able to delete? The answer should be no, if everything is right, because remember the role here is only API, there's no admin. So this person shouldn't be able to delete. Let's evaluate and see. Can they delete? Deny? No! Yay! They cannot delete. So that means it's working. Let's add them the role admin. Admin. So let's evaluate again and see. Now that they have the admin role, can they be able to delete? Yes, because now they have the admin role. Let's even if you remove the the API role, remember admin is both on the other scopes and also on the delete scope. So I should be able to delete, or I should even be able to view if I'm an admin, or create admin. Sorry about that. Resource, then delete. Let's say create. I should be able to create as an admin. I should be able to create as well. Yes, and it works. So that's pretty much it. Probably let me just show you something very quickly. Inside AskQRA, I told you and authorization. I told you now, like for policies here, remember in the previous client I'd aggregated all the policies, like for create, delete, no, create, view, update. I'd created one policy, but you could separate the policies if you want. You can create policy, a delete policy, edit policy, so many policies, but I just aggregated the policies. I only separated the admin policy so that the person will be able to, only admins be able to perform certain functions as delete. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And thank you for listening, and God bless you.